Have you ever wondered why self-assessment isn't getting the traction that you thought it might? In today's episode, we dig into why it's not helpful to self-assess when something is done. To add value, self-assessment has to happen early and often. Welcome back to Any Voices. Today we're diving into student self-assessment, success criteria, and evidence of learning, and how these ideas shift who owns the thinking in your classroom. Joined by educational consultant and NESD coordinator alum, Katie White, we unpack what it really means to move self-assessment from a checklist or final reflection into something that happens continuously through conversation and ongoing decision-making. If you've ever heard, "I don't get it. Is this done? It's good." This is the episode for you. We'll explore how students can use evidence to explain their thinking, clarify what success actually looks like, and make decisions about what comes next. Join us as we reflect on why self-assessment isn't just another task. It's already happening. The real question is, are we noticing it? And are we using it? If you're working to build student agency, strengthen assessment practices, or create more thinking in your classroom, this is the 3-part self-assessment series for you. Let's get started. Welcome to Northeast Voices, a podcast that spotlights the innovators and change makers in education. We're here to share the stories of inclusion, empowerment, and the impactful connections with the Northeast School Division and beyond, focusing on the pivotal role of students, families, and teachers. Join us as we dive into the conversations revealing the strategies and moments shaping the future of education. Any Voices is your platform for inspiration and connection, and is recorded in the Northeast School Division, sharing the land of Treaties 4, 5, 6, and homeland of the Métis in Northeast Saskatchewan. Be sure to subscribe and join our community of innovators and change makers. Let's get started. Welcome back to Any Voices. In this episode, we're here with Katie White, who used to be from the NESD, so we are super excited to have Katie on the podcast today. Katie is also an international presenter, educational consultant, and as you can see around my office, has a variety of different books. And today we are going to dig into student self-assessment and the idea of documentation of learning. And so I think this is really exciting. We use EDSB to document a lot of our learning, but those documentation or those moments of learning and growth are happening all of the time. What we're going to dig into today is how does all of that come together and work into the classroom in a manageable way so it's not an extra make-work project? It's not something that we have to think about doing all of the work and uploading at the end of the day. How can we capture some of those moments and create the routines and structures within the class so that it all flows together and self-assessment, which students are already doing, just becomes an even stronger skill that they have. And we have ways to communicate that. And hopefully, in the end, it makes us easier for both students and teachers to know where they're at and where they're going next. And so we're always working on building student agency and building a growth mindset. And so today, I'm excited to have you here, Katie, to talk a little bit more about that. So let's begin with, how do we dig into that and kind of look at how does it fit into what we're doing in the classrooms? And maybe it's not fit maybe isn't the right word. How does that become part of what we do in the classrooms and not something extra that we're thinking about?
Great question. So one of the things that is often a barrier to this process of reflection is that it feels like something else that we have to do, right? And that it's going to interrupt the flow of our instruction or whatever it is that we have planned for the day. But one of the ways that maybe is helpful to think about self-assessment or reflection or introspection or whatever you want to call it is that it's granting you and your students time, right? Time to slow down and continue to hold agency over what happens next. So in the course of planning lessons, we often think about what we're going to do and what resources we're going to give the students and what practice they're going to engage in. And it takes concerted effort to shift the center of decision-making to kids all the time. But it's what we need to do, right? Because that's the only way that they're going to become good decision makers in service of their own learning. So the way that I think it might be healthy to think about reflection and self-assessment, engagement and documentation is to think about it with the mindset of how do I slow down? How do I continue to place decision making in the hands of learners? And frankly, remove it from me because teachers have enough to do. And so trying to hold all decisions all the time also is just that's what wears us out. So how can I partner with kids in that? And so one of the ways to maybe think about reflection and self-assessment is that we're going to leverage the moments that happen as part of what we see and hear every day in our classrooms. So instead of thinking of self-assessment as something that goes with a portfolio that gets sent home, it's this formal documentation. That is a purpose of a portfolio. But the more interesting purpose to me is how can we leverage documentation or evidence? I'll probably call it evidence and not documentation. I use those terms synonymously. How can we leverage that stuff to help students make better decisions? And so I've created that. This isn't in the book, but I created a kind of simplified flow chart, if you will, to explain this. And thank you, Steph. That's amazing. So the flow chart has 4 parts, and I'll talk through them. So if you're not watching, but you're listening, it makes sense. But first of all, there's 2 parts of reflection or introspection that have to go hand in hand in order for it to be useful. There's a statement of reflection, which I'll explain, and there's evidence or support. So those 2 things, we can start with one or the other in a classroom experience. And I will say most commonly, as teachers, we might notice that we get statements of reflection before the evidence, or we get them at the same time, and then we have to sort of encourage kids to move from one to the other. But let me just model this. If a student comes up to you with an assignment that they've been working on, and they say, I don't know how to do this question, that is a statement of reflection. It's as simple as that. So that's a student saying something about a task or an experience. They're expressing challenge or struggle. Now, what we could do is we could say, well, here's what you do. And we could talk them through the process. But what that does is it centers the decision making and the growth on the teacher. It's now my responsibility to feed you your next steps, and then you go back and do that. And that becomes very recipe-like, and there's not a lot of internalization by kids. And that's why we'll often have repeat customers at our desk, because they're on the next question and they also want to know how to start that. So we want to get them holding some of that decision making. So what we can do instead of answering their question right away is say, how do you know you're having trouble? Like how did you know? And they might say, well, I couldn't work through the second step, or I didn't know how to even start. Great. That's great. That's some insight. And so then we can turn it back to them and say, so pointing the problem to the part that caught you up. Where were you? Or in your work, where did you have to stop? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to draw student attention to the evidence. So because sometimes when a kid says, I don't know how to start, what they're doing is they're saying, and I'm going to hand all of my agency to you, and now the responsibility is yours to fix this problem for me. When we say, show me in the evidence, what we're gently saying to students is, okay, so let's talk about your thinking. Where did you notice things got a little challenging? So that constant, let's go back to the evidence. I'll give you a second example because lots of folks know that I was an art teacher. So like a student would come up and, with a portrait or something they'd done, and they'd say, I don't know how to do this. I can't, or my picture sucks, or whatever it is that they say. That's a statement of reflection. So then instead of saying, oh, no, it's fine, get back in there, or no, you can start again, both of those are me solving the problem, I can say, what are you disappointed in? What part of it is frustrating you? So it's just turning the question back to them. If the child then says, well, it's this part, my sky isn't working, then I say, I can see what you're saying. And then I can automatically pivot into that third part, which is striving. I want kids to strive for something different. So it's not necessarily striving can be like, I want them to say what they want to be better about their product or performance, but that striving can be like, what do you want to do differently? Or how might it help us to think differently? So I really want to try and get us into that strategic realm. So what I might say to either of those students who've come up to my desk with a problem or a piece of art is I might say, so what do you wish was different? What do you want? What do you want to happen here? And if the child says, well, I want to be able to move through the problem, I want to be able to answer the problem. I say, that's great. So what do we think we need to be able to do that? Like, what would help you at this point? So asking the question, what would help you, is a way to activate learners in strategic decision making. So what do you need? Do you need me? Because I'm only one solution. Would it help to pair with someone else? Do you want to head into your textbook? Would it be useful to have a look at other portraits if that's what you're trying to draw, or another sky? We could look at some mentor texts or samples. And so I'm offering a menu of options. And what I'm saying to the learners is, I'm not making this decision for you. You have a decision to make in service of your learning. You've got several options. I can help you know what those options are, but ultimately you're going to have to make a decision. That's the striving, or the so now what. The final part of this flow chart is circling back, right? Closing that loop. So what I will sometimes say in a conversation with a student is I'll say, so you want to be able to work through this problem confidently. That makes sense. You've decided that what you're going to do is find a partner who can support you. How will you know that your decision to partner with somebody was a good one? What's going to indicate success? Right? And it might be I was able to work through the problem. Whereupon I can say, yep, that is definitely one indicator, is getting through to the answer. But I also want to remind you that part of success is being able to work with that partner well, right? We don't want to distract them from their work. So you're also going to have to figure out how to work together. If the child with the artwork says, I'll know that it's better if my sky looks different, I say that's a beautiful result that we're looking for. So describe to me what you would hope to see. And they might say, well, I want it to be blended or whatever. And I said, great, that sounds like you know what you're looking for. Let's circle back when you've given it a try and see if it worked. Now, all of this might sound like a conversation, which is exactly what it is. It's like thoughtful conversation. And those teachers who are in kindergarten, some people who've been teaching kindergarten for a while have had training on how to have these conversations, right? Because it's through conversation that we grow learning, but it's also through conversation that we can document learning ultimately. When the kid circles back and says, hey, Mrs. White, my sky looks better, I say, great. Let's have a look at the criteria for success and see if it met them. Yeah, it did. So now I can actually, I might say to the student, does it make sense to take a picture of this and upload it into Ensby? Because it seems like we could capture some real success here. Or I might say, hey, you know what? This was really well done. I'm going to just mark proficiency for this. I'm really proud of you. You got to where you were wanting to go. Or I might have to say, yeah, it still isn't there yet. You seem a little disappointed. You're right. We're missing these three things. So then I head back into that cycle. We're looking at the evidence. Let's make a statement of reflection. It isn't quite what we want. What do we want to do next? And then how can we circle back? So either we're continuing or we're recording or documenting again. But what I hope people notice in that big, long explanation is it's emergent. It's based on like what's happening, but also the agency always stays with the learner. So we just refuse to solve all their problems for them. So that's if we're starting with that statement of reflection. But I will say, Steph, we can also start with the documentation, right?
Right.
And then
Right.
work our way back. That's a more formal process. And that's what lots of us think about with self-assessment. And there's nothing wrong with that. I might say to the class, hey, everybody, take out your pictures, have a look at your sky. Let's review the criteria and let's see if you've met them. So let's make note of things that are strong and things that need improving. So I'm starting with the evidence. I'm inviting a statement of reflection or an act of reflection, but we're still going to flip into, so what next? What do you think your next steps are? Do we call it quits? Do we continue working? Do you need another piece of paper? Are you going to improve this one? And then the loop back. So did that work? Does that make sense?
Yes. I think what caught my attention there is reflection is always happening. It's just sometimes we're looking for that more formal reflection, or we're thinking about how am I going to put that into EDSB? And sometimes it makes sense to do that because that's a criteria. And so I think the other piece that resonated, we have unpacked outcomes and we have rubrics. And so what we've been working on going back to is, what is the success criteria for proficiency? What does that actually look like and sound like? Do students understand what we meant? Because our rubrics tended to be
more teacher heavy. So
Mhm.
this year we've gone back and looked at, okay, if we were to break this down into outcome-based success criteria, so those bigger success criteria, right? What are those things that we're working towards in the outcome? And then what is the evidence of that? And I think the
Mhm.
shift that you hit on is it's not about the task. The task happened to be that they were creating a picture in the sky was one of the ways
Right.
they were demonstrating something they were working on. But I could also have had a different photo or image that I'm working on or drawing, and that would have provided evidence as well. So it's
Totally.
not so much about the task, it's more about the evidence and how we're thinking about it. And those
Mm.
moments where I say, I don't understand, or sometimes teachers will share that we documented something in EDSB and then they wrote, it's good, or
Mhm.
I didn't like it, or I don't know. Those are all moments of reflection. That's the initial start of that. So that's the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of that. And
Right.
we're moving on. So I think the other piece that you've highlighted there is that there's a cycle, right? We make a reflection and we look at the evidence, or we look at the evidence that goes to a reflection. We figure out what we're going to do. We make that decision. We move forward. But in that forward process, it's kind of like a circle that keeps coming back
Mhm.
through, right? We
Mhm.
make a decision and we
Did
see
it
how that
work?
went, right?
That's
Did
right.
it work? Do we keep going? What's our next step? Are we closer to the criteria? So I appreciate that clarity is a really important piece of knowing what we want to dig into, that it could start with the documentation or it could start with, I don't know. And I think the other piece that comes up sometimes in documentation and conversations we've had with schools is we often, not all the time, I think we're shifting it, but sometimes we wait to the end to think what
Mhm.
we'll document
Mhm.
will be pretty and perfect and has all the right things. And then we're frustrated because it never gets to that, or students get frustrated because they don't get to that perfect piece. So they keep deleting the video to try to redo it. And then
Mhm.
sometimes we just get so frustrated with ourselves, we don't upload it at all, which then creates a challenge with our situation with the teacher wanting to see the evidence. So if we're looking at when can documentation happen, in your example, it's happening all the time.
All the
And we
time.
might choose to document in the
It's
messy
how we
middle.
learn. It's the visual, tangible manifestation of thinking and problem solving. And so documentation isn't an artifact that, yeah, you're right, that's polished. In fact, we have to remember that it's in the messiness that the learner becomes a learner, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not helpful actually to self-assess when we're done, because the striving will go nowhere because we've run out of time. So it's got to come early and it's got to come often. Another place where sometimes where this will show up is you'll have a student say to you, "Is this done? Am I done?"
Yes.
So they're referring to a product or performance, an artifact, a document, and
Yes.
they're saying, "Can I call quits on this?" And that's another, like, again, it's this notion that teachers are the ultimate decision makers for things, and we have to decenter ourselves. So, a response to that is, I don't know. What were you trying to do? Like, what
Mhm.
was the point of what you were creating or answering or doing? And if you're not sure, we got to get back into that success criteria and make sure. So it's almost a gentle refusal by the teacher to accept ownership
Yes.
for thinking and learning.
Yes.
It's not
It
our.
re Yes. And I think you had a quote in your book that I had reviewed when I was going through refreshing my brain, and you talked about, or I think you had quoted, "Teachers can't create learning, learners
Right.
create learning.
That's
Teachers are
Dylan
responsible for the
Williams. That's right.
situations that foster and enable and empower students to do the learning." I often think of kindergarten and early years where they'll send out invitations, where they'll create
Mhm.
those situations to do that, and they know those teachers are very clear on the criteria they're looking for. They're just approaching it from that, "Here's an invitation to do that,"
Yeah,
right?
let's let it emerge and then respond to that emergent need that kids have, or that reflection. And so what it will manifest as, interestingly, when you document and reflect, it manifests as kids doing more of the talking and teachers doing less. And I think, I mean, like, you will see and hear that. And so for a kindergarten classroom or a pre-K classroom, that's not news to anybody because those kids are talking all the time. It's how they make
Yes.
sense of the
Yes.
world. But what happens in school, and it's no one's fault, it's the system that just tends to do this, is kids tend to get more and more silent as they progress. And so part of changing this practice is changing the mindset of a learning classroom being a place where it's quiet. And I know Peter
Yeah.
Liljedahl talks about that, and there's lots of folks who are, I mean, this isn't news, but it does require quite a shift in how the classroom's going to function. If you're going
Yes.
to leverage those moments, you have to grant kids space to have voice, I think.
Yes. And we're also working, we have a number of teachers working on building thinking classrooms in math and
Yep.
all variety of subjects at all different grade levels. And I think that's one of the things that I think in the podcast with Karina and Raquel, they said off the start, it's hard to do the check-in with them. They're maybe working at a white book or whiteboard or they're problem solving, and they'll be like, "Is that right?"
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't answer that, or they're like, "How do I do this?" And you're like, "Well, look over here or look over here, or these two groups could get together, or what do you notice?" And then they're like, and then you exit. You don't
Yep.
hang around. You don't.
Nope.
You're being, what did they say?
Sounds
Being
like you
intentionally
need
less
to figure
helpful.
out
Yes.
how
Yes.
will you know? And I'll
Yes.
tell you, I'm not going to answer that. So how else could you find that out? That gentle refusal, like we
Mhm.
just can't. We just can't. I call it playing chicken with kids. They'll play chicken with us and hope that we
Yeah.
swerve first by saying, what do you think I need to do? And we'll say, well,
Yeah.
what do you think you need to do? And they'll say, well, what do you think I think you think
Yes.
need? Like, so we have to be willing to say, you know what, this isn't my decision. I know that you think that I'm the
Mhm.
ultimate decision maker, but you're doing this for a purpose besides me. So let's talk about what that purpose is. And if you're not sure what the purpose is besides me, then I have work to do in helping you understand that. It is a shift, really.
Yes, and it's okay to be intentionally less helpful
Yes.
when we know where we're going, and there's different times, right? Sometimes it starts with the reflection, sometimes we look at the evidence, sometimes
Right.
it's a scenario that you've created for them. I think part of the creating that shift is acknowledging that in the past, I always call myself a marks addict, right? Like I wanted to do really well all the time. So the stakes are often high when students are perceiving that they're being
Mhm.
assessed. So how do we help shift into that growth mindset, shift into it's okay to make a decision and try it out. And maybe it doesn't go well, but
Mhm.
learning that that wasn't the best decision for that or the best strategy that you picked is okay because it's not. Often students are worried that might decrease my mark. If I tried something different, that might decrease my
Mhm.
mark, or I don't know what the teacher wants, so that might decrease my mark. How do we help shift out of that and lower the stakes so that assessment is, I think you said in the book, assessment is ongoing and it's moving us forward all the time. It is not an endpoint judgment. I mean, there are points when the course ends and we make a decision, but how do we help shift? Because that struggle is important, that building persistence and resilience is important. All of these things are important life skills, regardless of the topic that students are working with. We want citizens in the future who can make decisions independently, who can look at data and make connections and analyze. And we only get better at that if we feel that it's safe to try that and fail at
Mhm.
it. And
Mhm.
so how do we help shift the stakes from high stakes to low stakes?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is kids are thinking and growing and stretching, the messier their work should be.
Yes.
So part of it is framing success less as polish and perfection and more as risk and stretch. And like, I mean, any teacher, the two things that are at our availability are their language and our actions.
Mhm.
So we can language moments where things are messy and say, holy, there's some good learning happening here, right? Or this didn't work. I think we got some learning that's going to happen. And that's for ourselves too. In fact, I'll give you an example. I was doing a workshop on Monday in front of whatever it was, 200 people, and I had explained a complex concept and I had them have a conversation. And as I was formatively assessing, right, or listening to
Mhm.
them, I heard that some misconceptions had happened. In that moment, I mean, I want to model this for all kinds of learners. So I just stopped them and I said, this is the point of a presentation where I have to own a mistake and I oversimplified something and this is what's happened. And then that's when I segued into, making mistakes is actually a really critical part of learning. And if we don't own that as adults, then
Mhm.
it's really tough for kids to feel like it's okay. So part of it is talking about learning as messy and difficult and uncertainty and all of those things, and actually asking kids to pay attention to their affect or how they're feeling. So you're
Mhm.
feeling unsure. What does that feel like? It doesn't feel good, does it? The
Yep.
good news is learning's going to come out of that. So just making that okay. So there's that. I think it's helpful in the assessment world. We're doing less labeling of formative and summative. We call assessment evidence, just evidence. And we might use it for a formative purpose or a summative purpose or both, or different things for different kids. So while I'm saying it's sometimes that formative summative, is this for marks thing, that needs to go away because it all matters. It all matters. So helping kids understand that assessment helps decision making by students and by teachers. That's the intention, right? It powers decision making. So when we're trying things, whether we're at the beginning of our learning, the middle of our learning, or near the end of our learning, all of the things we produce, whether it's products or performances, are simply, a manifestation of the things we're learning. And so some of them are going to be good and some of them aren't. Helping kids, though, understand where they are in the learning cycle can be helpful. So traditionally, like 20 years ago, I might have said, let's tell kids when it's formative or when it's summative. Now
Right.
I'm going to say, let's not, because that's getting messy. And kids are like getting hung up on that. Instead, say, where are we in our learning cycle? We're at the beginning, we're in the middle. Where do you feel? How confident do you feel? Are you getting close to the end? Or are you feeling like you're at the beginning? And then if it's at the beginning or middle, we can say, remember, when you're at that stage of learning, things aren't going to look great, or you're going to be unsure, or you're going to get stuck. And so when we start a class where there's going to be a lot of that, like we're going to do practice today, and some of you are going to struggle with some things, and that's by intention because I gave you stuff that was hard. So be prepared to feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable today. We can give them a heads up. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel uncertain. And we're going to work together to figure out how to move through that. So you can take risks. You can make mistakes because it tells you and me where we need to do some work. Like just talking openly or labeling a day of learning as a day of risk and mistake making and strategy, trying strategies and all of those things can be very helpful. Kids need very explicit articulation of that. They need a promise from us that they will not be penalized for uncertainty. And we may think we're saying that, guys, this is just practice. I told you it's practice. That's not enough. And you will not be punished through your grade for mistakes. So please try things today that feel less comfortable. Try a new strategy, find someone new to talk to, but today's the day for mess. And you can label that with a metaphor. I mean, there's so many things that people can use, about the learning process, but it's just really helpful.
As we wrap up part 1, here's 3 things to think about. First, self-assessment isn't just something we add at the end. It has to happen early and often. It lives in the everyday moments, the questions, the pauses, the conversations happening right in front of us. Second, evidence is what gives reflection meaning. When students move beyond "I don't get it" or "this is good" and start pointing to what they see in their work, that's when reflection becomes meaningful and actually drives learning. And third, agency stays with the learner. When we pause and resist jumping in with the answers, we're not stepping back. We're building students' ability to make decisions about their own learning. Asking, "What do you notice?" or "What might you try next?" helps students to build the confidence and skills to take ownership of their learning. In part 2, we dig into the culture of our classrooms, including the anxiety students carry about assessment, the discomfort of struggle, and the belief that getting it wrong means something's failed. We'll explore how to reframe discomfort, how to build a culture where risk and mistakes are expected and even necessary, and how to shift the responsibility for learning back where it belongs, with the students. Thanks for joining us for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 as we continue the conversation with Katie White. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining our community of innovators and change makers. We hope the conversations and stories have ignited a spark within. We'd like to express our gratitude to our dedicated Northeast educators. Until next time, remember to subscribe to Any Voices and join us on the next episode as we share the stories of learning shaping our future. Thanks for listening.